Hi, Owls. I'm Julia Prendergast, and this is a podcast that we're starting in Student Affairs called Student Affairs Spotlight, where we go around the division, talk to members of each department, and see how they got involved with student affairs and what's going on in the campus life. Today, our first guest is Dr. Larry Faerman, the Vice President of Student Affairs. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
First question, how did you get involved in student affairs? Where did your career start?
So interestingly enough, my brother had been a resident assistant at the University of Miami. And so when I went to college, I always knew that I wanted to be a resident assistant. I started out as a student employee, and then I decided to pursue student affairs as a profession by completing my graduate degree at Florida State, where I also worked as a hall director for university housing. And then it just kind of went on from there.
Good. Did you face any challenges along the way when you were starting up?
Well, interestingly, and I like to say this, that my interview for my resident assistant position was the only position that I was the first candidate offered for, if you will. So when I applied to graduate school, I was admitted, but I wasn't offered a graduate assistantship right away. So I actually moved back home after I graduated from my undergraduate degree, and I started out my career as a computer programmer. And fortunately, they had a late vacancy for a position. And so they called me about a week before school started as training was starting and said, "Are you still interested?" And I said, yes. So I would say that was probably the biggest hurdle was, just getting my foot in, if you will. And from there, I think doors have just, continued to open. Again, I haven't always been the first person the door opened for, but I got my opportunity to walk through.
So looking back, what do you think the biggest lesson you learned was in college?
I think the biggest lesson I learned was not to build a bridge or not to burn a bridge. I think that when I wasn't offered the graduate assistantship initially, obviously I was disappointed. I was angry. I felt that I'd given my heart and soul to my resident assistant position and that I'd done everything right to be offered that graduate assistantship. And I remember I was walking with my best friend and college roommate, and we were walking by the person that was the hiring authority for the position. And he knew me very well. He was my best friend and college roommate. And so, he kind of gave me the elbow and he said, "Larry, don't say anything." And I didn't. I was polite. I said hello, and kind of swallowed my feelings for that moment, if you will. And had I not, ultimately, I'm certain that they would not have been the person. I would not have been the person that they called come August when they had a vacancy arise.
What advice would you give to students who are facing a challenge like that right now?
I think it's always to take a deep breath, sleep on it, to try to control what your first impression and what your first urgency is. I think that there's this sense to, there's always this fight or flight. And I think that you can find the middle area. You don't need to fight. You don't need to run away. But to have some grace in the moment when things aren't going well, surround yourself with good people that you can bounce ideas off of, and try to investigate the process. Many times the barriers that I see students face are in terms of navigating a process, and that they want quick remedy and quick resolution. And that's in a bureaucracy as a university and as most organizations are, you typically have to work a process.
Mm-hmm. So kind of like if they think everything's going to go well, but they're going to expect the challenges in the road.
Yeah, and I think sometimes there's this, I want to get to step 10. I want to get to the top of the staircase without having to take individual steps. And so, when you are scaling a staircase, you can skip over maybe one or two steps, but you're not going from, the level all the way up to the next level without having to take those steps along the way.
Right. Mm-hmm. So coming back to student affairs, what are some key priorities you have for student affairs this semester?
So our priorities at their bases are always around student success. And so student success includes opening up the doors of opportunity for students to become involved. They are helping them to navigate the barriers that are unforeseen, that arise. And ultimately, we're constantly trying to improve our programs and services and impact the student experience. We never want a student to, at the end of the semester, say, well, that was a waste of my time, or I don't like it at Florida Atlantic, or I didn't meet people that were of value to me. So we really want each of our offerings to speak to people with the understanding that the complement of our programs and services are meant to reach everybody. No individual service program or interaction is going to obviously be able to meet 30,000 students, but that the complement of our program services and facilities in some way speaks to each individual student.
What big projects does Student Affairs have coming up this semester?
Well, we are in the process of breaking ground on a new 670-bed residence hall. So construction is always slow. That planning process has been underway for at least 2 years, and it'll be fall of 2026 before we open that facility. We're in the beginning stages of the naming process of that residence hall, and so hopefully we'll have a name for that hall in the next couple months. We are starting to plan for the expansion of the student union on the Boca Raton campus. We are right now in the midst of starting the elections for the next slate of student government leaders. And so, as a student affairs professional, I strongly believe in the shared governance and in hearing the voice of elected leadership. And so the student government elections always provide an opportunity for us to evaluate what we want to do next. We'll continue to follow our men's basketball, our women's basketball, our softball and baseball teams, and really how we're aligning the student experience to, meet what athletics is doing on our campuses, because they are student athletes. And so as a part of our student community, we want to make sure that we're supporting them as well.
And speaking of students, do you have any student success stories that you want to share that have come out of the division?
Sure. I think, there's a number of them from the perspective of former student government presidents that have received opportunities to work in Washington, D.C. or to pursue law school, from students that have needed financial assistance, and we've given them a little bit more to get them, over that hump, to our Kelly Struhl scholars, which are all first generation, first in family, low income to go to college. Certainly the opportunities for student media who have, received a number of awards at the local, regional, and national level, and the job prospects that I think emerge from that. I think that the amount of accomplishments that our students have here, are limitless.
So moving forward with leadership, what does that look like to you, or what steps should students take looking for leadership?
So, leadership is developing a degree of patience, having a plan and being able to communicate that plan, and understanding when that plan isn't hitting right and how you might have to revise that plan. It's also the ability to receive criticism, right? So I think that we can be overly critical at times in today's day and age, and we can also sometimes not receive criticism as well as maybe we should. And I think when you put yourself in a leadership position, you always have to know that the amount of criticism that you are going to receive is always going to outweigh your list of accomplishments. And I think that my leadership philosophy or my leadership style is centered on sharing as much of the accolades as I can with my staff, and assuming as much of the blame and or responsibility as I can. Because ultimately, nobody's position in the division is easier than mine. My position is really strategic. My position is no harder than anybody else's, is the other way to kind of say it. And I think that's true for our students as well. Student leadership positions are challenging. Being a student is challenging because very few students are only a student. Some of them are also working full-time. Some of them are family caregivers. Unforeseen things that come up for professional staff also come up for students. And so everybody's role, regardless, is extremely challenging. And we all bring things from outside of our experiences here on campus to work or to school. And so having that degree of grace and empathy is important.
What advice would you give to a student who's dealing with all that on their table if they have too many things going on?
Sometimes you got to move some plates off the table. I think that as a student, you think of yourself as having a finite time to accomplish all the things that you want to do. And I think that's true of professionals too. And I think that we think in terms of weeks, months, semesters, and then the year. And there's some things that you have to move off your plate because most people have high aspirations. They want to accomplish a lot, and things come up. And so it's determining what you can move off your table, finding the right people to surround yourself with that lift you up and don't bring you down. And then when needed, not being hesitant to utilize the resources that are available to you. So, we have the Dean of Students office. There is financial aid. There is counseling and psychological services. There is health promotion. For some people, it's just taking a spin class at Campus Rec or, punching, the heavy bags. And so I think that we offer a tremendous number of resources, so much so that it can be overwhelming and it can be hard to determine what path should I take. But really the first step is the acknowledgement that you need some assistance. And sometimes that can be the hardest step to take. And then, familiarizing yourself with the resources and what resources might be best of use to you. And understanding that there is no, one size fits all, and there's no necessarily, as they call it, magic pill. So you may try something and it may not work. That doesn't mean that your situation is hopeless. It just means that I need to try a different strategy until I find one that works for me.
You mentioned someone lifting you up. Do you have someone in your life that lifts you up?
Well, certainly, I would be remiss not to mention my family. Certainly I think that when we talk about people that are able to listen to you without judgment, but who still have investment in your success, family is definitely there. Whether it's my wife or whether it's my kids, I certainly find support from staff within the division. And I find staff among the university's leadership team. So, I think I have tried to surround myself with those positive people, as I kind of mentioned a few minutes ago. And I also think it's important to have a support network that isn't affiliated with you all at all in some ways. So like I have friends that I used to work with that might work at other institutions or maybe aren't in student affairs, or maybe knew me when I was growing up. And so there are times that, where they say tell a tree, like the tree person is someone who you might feel close with, but maybe isn't a part of your inner circle anymore. And so, I mentioned my, best friend and college roommate earlier, like he lives in Texas. We don't see each other hardly ever. We probably don't talk that often, but when I come into a situation where there's absolutely, nobody else to speak with or someone that I have to talk with that has no real interaction in my current sphere, that's someone that I call.
In college, did you have a mentor or someone close to you?
Yeah, definitely. Being a resident assistant, you're immersed in terms of living with the people that you work with. And, I think that there was an individual that was a hall director in another building that, again, I wasn't employed in. I think sometimes people look to their immediate supervisors as a mentor, and ultimately there's a power relationship there. So I don't always advise that your mentor is your supervisor. I think there's a different relationship there. And so he was the hall director of a building that I wasn't employed in. We became really close. I actually went to work with him at the University of Illinois where I had my first professional position. I reported to him then, and that was challenging for our relationship because he moved out of mentor role and into supervisor role. But then when I wasn't under his direct report, he then moved into that mentor role. And I think that as our relationship has evolved, we're really more peers now than we are because we're in similar spots professionally, but I still call him when there are times. And I would be remiss not to mention my brother. I said, the reason I became an RA was because my brother was an RA, and I've always looked up to him. And so I think he's served as that role model or that mentor for me as well.
If students are feeling maybe alone right now as they're starting up their college experience, what would you advise them to do, like how to seek a mentor?
Well, we have the mentoring program at Florida Atlantic, which is housed in our new student transitions and family engagement office. We also have mentoring programs aligned with some of the academic units. I think if folks aren't looking for a formal mentoring opportunity, we have over 300 student organizations, and I truly believe that a student organization for anyone. There are a number of student employment positions on campus. And I think that one of the things that I think folks find when you pursue student employment on campus is that you're working with other students. You're working with staff, those that may have connections and help you cut through that red tape. And so I feel like whether you're a residential student or not, students spend a significant amount of time on campus. And so it's important to find partners, mentors, supervisors, advisors here on campus that can help to add to your feedback loop.
Going back to your college days, do you have a favorite college memory?
It was a much different time. Obviously, back then, I think that, when I think back to, my college experience, most of my memories, again, we're talking before the internet, before social media, before cell phones, is really, and this may sound a little bit ancient, but, we played cards every night in the lobby of the residence hall. And so I met really good friends in that time frame. We had a lot of good experiences, played a lot of, basketball 5-on-5, with different people in the residence hall. But I really think that, my years as an undergraduate, were shaped by the folks that lived in that hall with me. We didn't have bathrooms within the suite. We didn't have individual bedrooms. So you really were living in an environment where you walked by, 100 people or more, and you really knew those folks because you saw them entering and exiting the building. You were, hanging out in the lobby with them, just sitting around, chatting about different things. And I think there was much more of a collective in terms of having to make a plan and execute that plan versus kind of some of the last minute planning, that we have today. Mm-hmm. That was a long time ago. I'm sure that there were challenging times that I've just kind of probably pressed out of my memory as well. There was various road trips that, we took, whether it be to Disney or, just kind of visiting friends at other universities. But again, when my kids asked me, because my older daughter was getting ready to go to college, and she was like, well, tell me about your experience. And really, most of it was really that time, hanging out in the lobby of the residence hall, playing cards and, just kind of chit-chatting about various things.
Mm-hmm. So now, how you mentioned social media wasn't a thing back then, do you think that's kind of taking away from student experiences now?
I don't think that it's taking away from the experiences. I think that it takes away from some of the depth of the experiences. I think on one hand, there are virtual spaces that exist that you can find much more easily. I think that you can find out information about what's going on much more easily. I think the challenge now is that, there is that sense of FOMO, or there's this sense that everybody else is living their best life and I'm here not. And I think that the greatest challenge in social media, I think, is obviously people are only posting the highest points of their life. So we might have this impression that folks have everything going right and that they're not facing the same challenges that we are. And so I think that the detriment is again, just this, we don't see other people that are struggling the way that we might have seen if I was, again, sitting around the table playing cards and we're, playing a game that takes an hour or so. We're going to have a different degree of conversation. We're going to feed off of each other's positive or challenging energy. And I think find a little bit more commonality and a little bit more, again, depth and breadth to that experience than I think that we find in the digital place.
Uh-huh. Staying with the digital aspect, how do you think Student Affairs is keeping up with that as times are always changing?
Yeah, I mean, we're pushing out information on social as much as we can. I think we're trying to develop a greater LinkedIn presence, not just from a divisional place, but from individual professionals. We're utilizing the digital monitors on TV. We're pushing out information through email. We are starting to dabble a little bit in the AI space right now, specifically in our career services area. Telehealth is starting to kind of pick up a little bit. But I think for us, it's being able to moderate what we can do in the digital space, what we can do in the social space, what we can do in the AI space, but also understanding that, our communities are built on human interaction. Society has been based on human interaction. And so we've got to be able to, cling to and hang on to the quality interactions that we have face-to-face and person-to-person with each other and with our students.
Uh-huh. So kind of turning to you now, besides student affairs. So when you're not working, do you have any favorite hobbies or activities you like to do?
Well, I work a lot, in truth. I also volunteer with the Soccer Association of Boca Raton. So that's sometimes at various times of the year. We provide recreational, competitive. We have soccer for for children all the way through young adults that have accessibility-related or neurodivergent needs. And then we have an adult league. So that takes up a strong amount of my time as a volunteer position. I have 4 cats and a dog that I spend some time with. As I mentioned, I'm a dad as well as a husband. I also run, and I also ride a Peloton. So I would say that my exercise is something that I do not only for the physical health perspective, but it also helps with mental health and running specifically. I find to be fairly meditative. I listen to a lot of podcasts, so I would say that probably rounds out my free time.
How did you get into, because you mentioned running and Peloton, how did you get into that? What started that up for you?
I started running when I lived on campus. My boss was a runner, and it was a low-cost way to get into fitness, if you will. And I think that when I had a running partner, so it was something that we just did every day. And then I started doing it, and I started running, and then I picked up the Peloton really because as I got older, I was afraid of all the wear and tear on my knees, and I realized that the recovery time was taking me longer. And also, I found that it was maybe easy to hit the snooze if I didn't want to go run and then have an excuse not to later. But when you have the exercise bike there on demand, it's harder to make excuses. And I got into Peloton, and there was a handful of people that I worked with that also did the Peloton. So similar to having a running partner, there is that kind of level of accountability that you see where folks can see whether you're working out or not. And that's kind of how I got into it, again, is to drive fitness, but also drive the mental health and well-being as well.
How would you say you balance your personal life and your work life?
I don't. To be honest, I think that, if you were to ask the people I live with, they would tell you that, I do prioritize work. I think when you work in student housing for a long time, I think it becomes hard to delineate work versus home. And I think that because, I lived on campus from the time I left my parents' house for 18 years between my undergraduate experience, graduate experience, and professional. I lived on campus here at Florida Atlantic for 11 years. So I've worked at FAU for 25 years. So it's a little bit, more than half that I've been off campus. But I think that because I worked and lived on campus, it became easier to prioritize being here. And so I just don't think I do. And I think there's an acknowledgement of that. And some of that, when my kids were younger, we're having them come to events with me. But like I said, I think work has come first. And I think my wife understands that and understood that from when she met me. I don't know that my kids always understood it. But, you do the best you can.
Kind of each your own. You got to figure it out on your own.
Like I say, I don't know that I was the best present parent being there at all times as maybe I should have been. But, at some point you do the best you can as it happens.
And then one final question for you. Students, whether they're starting, they're ending their college, or in the middle of it, what is one advice you'd give to them?
It's never too late to get involved. I think that, the college experience, especially undergraduate, you accumulate 120 credits thereabout, and then you walk out of here with a diploma. I don't know that most students see how each semester builds upon each other, and they just see it as I take 12 or 15 credits a semester. I go to school for between 8 and 12 semesters, and then this diploma makes me qualified to go do whatever job I'm going to do. I think you can be in your second semester of your senior year and maybe you didn't ever do anything, but go to a basketball game, go to a softball game, go to a baseball game, vote in student government elections, go to Toast to the Grads. I think that it's important to find something that complements your experience. And if you're not a senior and you're a junior or sophomore or first-year student, or in your first or second year of graduate school, find something that resonates with you and that you can become deeply engaged in. So you can be an officer of a student organization, or you can join student media, or you can, have employment on campus, or, start going to the recreation and fitness center, even if it's just to sit by the pool and study because you don't want to work out. But there's just so many things to do. And I think when folks look back upon their college experience, I know I do, when I look back upon mine, there are things that I knew about and I just said, I'll get to them next semester, and then never did. So, I think those small steps of involvement and engagement, add up to the campus experience that we're trying to provide.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Faerman.
Well, thanks for having me. I wish you luck. I wish you luck for the podcast.
Thank you.
It's been my honor to be, the first guest. And I'm certain that the bar was set at a nice level that others will.
Very high.
Okay.
Very high.
So, well, not too low, not too high. Thank you so much.
Thank you all for tuning in. This was our first episode of Student Affairs Spotlight with our first guest, Dr. Larry Faerman. Tune in next time. We'll see you then. Go Owls.